Welcome back to Reviews with Elaine, because I have opinions. And today's opinions will be about The Last Heir of Blackwood Library by Hester Fox. Okay, so congratulations to my friend Jasmine for managing to find exactly the kind of book I was looking for when I said I wanted a good spooky ghost story with likable characters. That's exactly what this book is. So The Last Heir of Blackwood Library is a story of a woman named Ivy in 1925 in England. She's barely scraping by, sharing a small room with her best friend, and just hoping each day to find a job, until suddenly, out of the blue, she is contacted by a solicitor, who informs her that she is the last heir of the Hayworth family. She is suddenly Lady Hayworth, the owner of a faded but enormous estate in Yorkshire. The only stipulation is that she has to live at the estate, and so she uproots her life, packs her meager belongings, and soon finds herself in Blackwood Abbey. This should be a wonderful, life-changing new beginning for her. But Ivy does not exactly feel welcome here. There's the staff who seem standoffish at best, a ghost, a possible curse, and her chauffeur who warns her to leave for her own good. Ivy feels completely lost until she meets Sir Arthur Maybury in the local bookstore. He mentions the Abbey's amazing library full of ancient manuscripts, and he begs for a chance to come see it. Ivy didn't even know the library existed, and so when she gets home, she demands the door unlocked and finds a place that should be heaven for her. Finally, Ivy has found the place that she feels like she fits in this new life, because if there's one thing she knows, it's books. She begins the project of cleaning, cataloging, and revitalizing this amazing collection, housing books on every topic under the sun. But pretty soon, it becomes clear that Ivy has unlocked more than she expected when she unlocked the library doors. Will she be able to fix what's wrong with this haunted library? And will she survive the process? So yeah, no, as I've already implied, this book is exactly what I like in a book. I made a couple of shorts about how much I absolutely loved the writing and the vibes of this book. Because yeah, the first thing I noticed about it is this book has immaculate vibes. The book is beautifully atmospheric, we've got a lovely setting, lovingly described, we have heavy, dark, depressing themes that interweave perfectly with the scenery and characters. And this felt like those ghost stories that I loved as a kid. All faintly spooky, creeping concern, but very few moments that are actively trying to be big scares. Because I don't really like those moments that try to be big scares in books, because I just don't find any books exceptionally scary. Like, there's never a point that I'm reading going, oh god, I'm scared. Like, I've always wondered if maybe I just don't have an as aggressive an imagination as other people, but I'm just less likely to be empathetically entangled with the events of a book than on, like, a movie or a TV show. Like, I don't feel like I'm the one in danger the way that I sometimes do when I'm watching a really good movie. But, like, I'm also the kind of person that goes to haunted houses and just gets completely distracted by the beautiful decor and completely forgets I'm supposed to be scared of stuff. So maybe I'm just a weirdo here and just not scared of spooky shit, but I love ghost stories. I love spooky things. I just love the feeling of that slow creeping, like, ooh. The gothic architecture, the energy that is like the past as a sentient being trying to almost constantly rewrite the present. And this book had all of that in spades. And the other side of what I was looking for was likable characters. And yeah, I really liked these characters. Or at least the ones I was supposed to like. There were plenty of characters in here I wasn't supposed to like, and I didn't like them. But Ivy in particular was perfect for this kind of book, in my opinion. She was kind, empathetic, thoughtful, and mournful. She was also a very bookish person, which is just... it's a great trait to have in a book character, because, like, your audience is automatically going to have that connection in common with them, because, of course, if your audience is reading a book, they're probably a bookish person. And in this particular case, she was the kind of bookish that matches the kind of bookish I am. She had some thoughts about books that, like, it felt like something I could have said myself, except it was phrased a lot better, a lot prettier. For example, on page 241, Ivy had always cherished books for that stillness they allowed in a world that valued fast, unforgiving progress, regardless of the human expense. There was a magical link between the words on the page and the vivid images that simultaneously unfolded in her mind. But there was no unspoken pact between the secret manuscript's author and herself, wherein she was given the bricks for building castles in the air. Like, that is so perfect to the way I interact with books that I just stopped and stared at it for a while. But she is also the right kind of imperfect for a horror book for me. Like, she definitely has her faults, and she makes mistakes that we can watch her and go, oh, that's going to lead her down a bad path. But they work towards the creation of the story, and they all allow her to still be likable. Like, for example, one of her big faults is she's rather passive, while also being incredibly stubborn. And that is something that I recognize in myself, so of course I empathize with her there. But that allows her to be a character that is dragged along by the story, is dragged into these horrific moments, and we can sort of blame her, it is her fault, but at the same time, we're not mad at her. And that's the level of fault that I feel like you need your characters to have in horror. And the point is, she's a character I enjoyed spending 300 odd pages with, and who I cared when bad things were happening to her. And I loved the way the changes in her mind worked throughout the book. So a bit of a spoiler here, but I sort of have to talk about this because a major part of the structure of the book is built around the spoiler, and it's one of the main things I want to talk about. Like, the structure of the book, I absolutely loved it and really need to discuss it. And so, yeah, warning, spoilers ahead, not huge spoilers, but pretty big spoilers. But the library is eating Ivy's memories throughout the book, and it's amazing how it is shown. So, like, in the beginning, we have no idea what's happening. In the beginning, there's just a normal amount of time skipping in between in the scenes, in the narrative, and, like, we skip over some less important bits that would normally be skipped in a story, but otherwise, most of what we're told is everything that's happening in Ivy's life, and then ever so slowly, it starts to shift. And I really doubt anyone is going to notice this when you're just reading it casually. It is a very subtle shift, but there are just a few scenes here or there that feel like they cut off a bit early, or like something was skipped, and just felt faintly incomplete without you really being able to put a finger on what feels like it's missing. And then there are a few tiny references here or there that make you feel like there are some scenes that just aren't appearing on page. Like, they're talking about something happening and you're like, I don't remember that. And then there are literal things that you know have to be happening for the story to make sense, like organizational things that are just never mentioned at all. And it feels like they are supposed to be mentioned. And these small plot elements that are brought up and then just seem to disappear out of nowhere. And all of this at first glance could be interpreted as just bad writing, like the author just cut too much in one of the edits. But right at the moment that it's becoming explicitly clear what's happening, that you're missing bits, and that it was really noticeable, especially if you're reading carefully, then right at that moment when you might start being annoyed that the book is just flawed, you're also beginning to get the information you need to know that Ivy's memories are disappearing. And that way, like, it feels like your memories are disappearing with hers. And the way the scenes are written, you can just feel what is missing often. So, like, even though it's not on the page, you know what got skipped without actually, like, having to read any of it. And the best version of this is there's a scene on the moors where Ivy is talking to Ralph, and you can feel that something else happened there. But she doesn't remember it. And it's never written down, and at this point you don't know why she's forgetting, or how much she's forgetting, or what is happening to the memories. You just get the vibes that she's forgetting stuff. And there are a couple moments throughout the rest of the book that this scene comes up, and it's mentioned in passing, and you're just going, oh my god, I need to know what else happened on the moor. Something else happened, obviously. And it's not until the very end of the book that you find out what she forgot from that moment. And it's a brilliant reveal, and by the time you get there, you have the feeling that you know vaguely what it is, but you do not know the actual information, and it worked perfectly in the narrative. I loved it. But also, the way that some of the scenes aren't on the page, but are just really heavily implied, and other scenes that are on the page and then Ivy later forgets them, it gives the author a perfect out for one of the biggest problems that I see mystery and ghost stories often having. And that is that there's always things that the author knows that the reader needs to know, and or at least vaguely understand, but the characters cannot know. And quite often that is done by just having exposition dumps, like you're just told, and that feels a little bit whatever. But this book, no. It gave Ivy the perfect excuse not to know something that is aggressively obvious to the reader. For example, like, we know she's losing her memories well before she does. We know what her relationship with Ralph is. We know that Arthur is clearly bad long before she figures it out. And while, yeah, there were moments that I was literally just screaming at the book, like, why are you trusting that twat waffle? He's obviously bad. But at the same time, I fully understood why she was feeling this way, and I understood how she got dragged along by these events to the place she was at. And oh my god, this book did such an inhumanly good job of integrating themes into the plot. So like, the way the loss of memory interplayed with the loss of people in the war and Ivy's loss of agency was a beautiful dance. And there was this erasure of women's input into history that interplays with the fact that the nun's life work was overwritten by a murderous, ambitious man, and then the same thing was sort of happening to Ivy in real time, and her deepest emotional relationships were being wiped even from her own mind, and the evil didn't even value those deep emotional relationships, but he was stealing them, and I just fucking realized that the ambitious, powerful, war hawkish men chose to call themselves the Sphinxes, which is a inherently female monster, so they are stealing the femininity there. And the fact that one of the things that Ivy forgets is about her marriage and whether or not she is married, and her feelings of not knowing if she is her own woman anymore, and the fact that destroying the evil did not magically inherently give her back her memories instantaneously, and she had to actively work to recover them, and like, just, oh my god, all these themes work so perfectly together. And then there's a moment at practically the end of the book that completely recontextualizes everything again. On page 328, those forgotten memories shape us as much as the remembered ones. Everything we shared, whether you remember it or not, brought us here. And it's just all working together so well! And the epilogue really manages to pound in the themes of the erasure of womanhood compared to the violence of men by having the mad monk's work completely forgotten by literally just removing a few pages from the nun's beautiful manuscript. And y'all, this book was saying some really interesting, beautiful, and well thought out things about loss, women's history, class, and power. I will say it also had something to say about great men style history, and I felt like that had been said before, and like it was so completely overshadowed by like all the other themes that all I really cared about with that particular theme was that Ivy got her hero climax and got to shoot a gun, which was also foreshadowed in the prologue. And like, this book was just so well crafted. The bits worked together so perfectly. And I also love the way that when Ivy was at her lowest, when the library and the men around her had taken the most from her, the actual writing itself mirrors that journey, and it becomes more simple and more disjointed, and like, you feel slightly drunk reading those pages. So it's all just perfectly woven together. But that is not to say that I have no complaints. I do have a few things that I would like to talk about. Like, this is the second book I've read in the last year that involved someone in a position of poverty inheriting an estate, where it felt like the author doesn't quite understand what it would mean to someone who is struggling financially to just be given a home. Like, Ivy does jump at the chance and signs the forms immediately, but it's phrased as she has to do it quickly before she has second thoughts. And I'm like, what second thoughts are there to have? She has no job, no family, one friend, can barely make rent and feed herself, and she has been given a giant house that will provide an income. Like, I don't care how much someone might be attached to a certain city. Like, I don't know anyone who would not jump at that chance. And, like, I could have understood it if it was presented as Ivy having misgivings about her ability to manage an estate like this. but that's barely mentioned, if at all. And like the management of the estate almost never appears in this book whatsoever. It's just presented as her being unsure if she wants to give up her life in London. And like, do these authors not understand how much of a weight off of people's shoulders it would be to not have to worry about rent? And she's not going to have to worry about food either. Like, I'm sorry, I would kill for that opportunity, even ignoring the haunted library, which is something that I've always wanted in my life. But like, I can almost understand why Susan doesn't go with her, considering Susan is presented as having a lot of aspirations that center around people and city life, and she cannot achieve that in rural Yorkshire. But I kept even expecting her to show up, and not just to check on Ivy, but to be like, I can't make rent. Can I live with you for a while? And like, some of the money stuff in general here felt a little bit underexplored. Also, Arthur's end felt a little anticlimactic, though I think that was honestly on purpose because the book is sort of saying that he wasn't the true antagonist in the first place, but when we have been focusing on him as the big bad in such an important role for a good portion of the book, and it suddenly ends with very little input from our heroine, it just felt a little bit empty. And on that note, even though it is necessary for the plot and the themes, there are moments, especially towards the middle in this book, where Ivy's helplessness just felt annoying to read. Like, it was one of those things that I recognized was the correct thing for the story and for the events, to have her so frozen and incapable. But even though it was right for the story and I understood why the character was acting this way, it's just annoying. And I think the reason most of us really read is for a chance to imagine ourselves in a position of agency. We read stories of people who changed their own lives, changed the lives of the people around them, and changed the world because we crave the opportunity to make that kind of difference. And I think many of us just feel that lack of agency in our real lives, which means that a lack of agency in a book that we're reading is both something that feels very valid to explore, but also something that is just annoying. Like, I cannot find another word for it. It's just a bit annoying. And, like, we are trying to escape that lack of agency. And so, yeah, when you see it on the page, it can drag you down a little. Beyond that, I do want to talk a bit about the fact that this book is using as a set piece a real manuscript. Like, the mysterious manuscript in this book was clearly inspired by the Voynich manuscript. And this book gives it a new, more interesting than the probable reality backstory. So for anyone who spends less time on the unexplained history side of the internet, the Voynich manuscript is a real manuscript that was discovered in 1912 by a bookseller named Wilfrid Voynich. It is in a language or code that no one has ever been able to decipher. It's got hand-drawn illustrations of flowers and women in pools, and has been dated to the 1500s most commonly. And there are probably hundreds of theories out there as to what this manuscript is about, what it's saying, what it is. Some historians believe it is probably a meaningless fake made by either Voynich himself or by someone else further back in its history. That they were just attempting to make something that looked like it was worth a lot of money. Others say the code is clearly an actual language just because it's got too much structure of a real language to be something fake. Some others say it was written by one hand, whereas some other historians say it's actually several hands written across a couple of centuries. Basically, every theory in the world about it, including, yes, some people out there say it was written by aliens. It was not. But the point is, this book never names that manuscript, but there is this mysterious manuscript that's found in the library in a language no one can decipher, and the descriptions of the images in this manuscript sound an awful lot like the Voynich manuscript. So I just assume that the book is inspired by that manuscript. And I like that connection to reality because, if for no other reason, I have seen the images of the Voynich manuscript. I know what the author is talking about, so very little bits of description give me a perfect image of in my mind of what we're talking about. And also, it's just interesting to bring in that manuscript because of all the theories I've ever heard about who could have written it, I've never actually heard anyone suppose it could have been written by a woman. And just the implications of the author imagining a female author who was erased by a male author and then rediscovered, and it's just a cool additional layer to what is already a very layered take on the erasure of women's input into history. But yeah, overall, I just loved this book. You might have noticed that even the things that I was trying to say something slightly negative, I still ended up often saying that, like, well, that wasn't a mistake. It was clearly on purpose. It's clearly there for a reason. And I just think that this book is very deeply thoughtful, meaningful, but also it's a book that's just fun. Like, it's a bit structurally complex, but it does not come across that way when you're first reading it. It's only when you're looking back at it you realize the structure was a bit complex. And, like, it's a ghost story. It's a love story. It's a historical fiction. It's a cute little story about a woman finding her place in the world. But it's also an iceberg of a book. The more I think about it, the more layers I uncover in my mind. I kept having to scroll back up in the review while I was writing it to add little bits of extra thoughts and extra concepts because there was just so much to parse here. And I think it's a beautifully well done, and yeah, I think this is one you should read. Even if this is not your normal genre, go ahead and read it. It's a damn good book.